Why anger keeps lying to you. There was a small town where everybody walked around carrying buckets of gasoline and pretending they weren't holding anything at all. They didn't call it gasoline. They called it anger. They clutched the handles so tightly their fingers cramped, but if anyone asked what was in the bucket, they shrugged and said it was nothing. And because nobody wanted to admit they were the ones holding the fuel, they blamed every fire on somebody else's match. One teenager in that town started to notice something strange. He watched grown men screaming at each other in front of the hardware store, faces red, hands shaking, buckets swinging at their sides. But when he really paid attention, the flames never came from the words. They always came from the buckets. Every time someone lost it, a little flare jumped up from inside their bucket, scared them half to death, and they pointed at the nearest person and yelled, "Look what you made me do!" The boy started testing a quiet theory. He watched his father slam a door so hard the windows rattled. Nobody had hurt his father in that exact moment. No one had hit him. No one had insulted him. But an old story in his father's mind got bumped, and the bucket exploded for a second. The boy realized something that almost no one in town wanted to hear. Anger never told the truth about what was really going on. It didn't explain the real problem. It didn't reveal the real hurt. It didn't point to the wound that needed healing. It just shouted, "Look over there," while the real story stayed buried under years of dust. Underneath the anger, everyone was hiding the same secret script. For some it was, "Mum didn't choose me." For others it was, "Dad left and never came back." For others it was, "Someone I loved died and God did nothing." Different words, same sentence. Something is wrong with me and something is wrong with God. Nobody wanted to look at that. So they walked around with buckets instead. One afternoon the boy walked past an old woman sitting on her porch. Her bucket had a long crack down the side, and a thin line of gasoline dripped onto the wood and disappeared before it hit the ground. "You see it, don't you?" she said without looking up. He sat on the step below her and nodded. "Everyone here thinks they're mad at each other," she murmured. "But anger is just the costume. The real thing underneath is guilt and fear." He frowned. "Guilty for what?" he asked. "For a story in their head that never actually happened the way they think," she said. "Something they decided was their fault. Or God's fault. And once they decided that, they used anger as a smoke machine to hide it." A breeze slid across the porch. Her bucket flickered with a tiny orange tongue of fire. She didn't move. "That's how the lie stays alive," she said. "Anger makes it look like the problem is out there right now. Someone's disrespect. Someone's mistake. Someone's betrayal. But it's always an echo from back there, in a scene no one wants to rewind." The boy watched her set the bucket down gently at her feet. Then she did something no one else in town had ever done. She stood up and walked to the edge of the porch without taking the bucket with her. Nothing exploded. Nothing burned. The bucket just sat there in the sun, plain and ordinary, like any other empty container. The boy stared at it and felt his chest twist. If the bucket could sit there without hurting anyone, maybe it was never the bucket that had power. Maybe it was the belief in what it was holding. That night, lying in bed, he thought about every time he had snapped at his little brother. Every time he'd punched a wall. Every time he'd slammed a door and told himself, "I wouldn't be this mad if they didn't push me." But all those moments had the same shape. Nothing out there was big enough to explain the size of the explosion inside. The math didn't work unless there was a giant hidden story under the floorboards of his mind. The next day, something happened at school. A classmate laughed when he stumbled over an answer. The old anger shot up so fast he felt it in his teeth. His hand even twitched toward the kid. But just before the fire jumped, he remembered the porch, the bucket, the crack, the woman walking away. For the first time, he didn't look at the classmate. He looked straight at the feeling. "What are you really about?" he asked it silently. It didn't answer with words. It answered with a memory. Standing in a hallway as a child, hearing adults argue behind a door, feeling like the whole thing was his fault just because he existed there listening. The anger in the classroom wasn't about the kid's laugh. It was about that hallway, that door, that old private conclusion, "I'm the problem." He felt his throat tighten. Not with rage this time, but with grief for something that never should have been believed. Right there in the middle of class, he did the only thing that ever really cracks the bucket. He told the truth to himself. "This isn't about him," he admitted in his mind. "It's about a story I made a long time ago, and that story was wrong." The fire went out so quickly it almost confused him. The feeling didn't need him to punch anyone. It didn't need him to raise his voice. It just needed to be seen for what it was and where it came from. After that, his life didn't suddenly become peaceful. People still cut him off in traffic. People still lied sometimes. People still forgot to call back. But each time anger rose up, he treated it like a shady salesman knocking on his door. He stopped letting it tell the story. Instead, he listened for the older voice beneath it, the one that kept whispering, "You're not safe. You're not worthy. You're alone." And every time he caught that voice, he answered it with a quiet, stubborn honesty. "This is my old script talking," he'd tell himself. "Not the present. Not this person. Not the truth." In a town full of people still dragging buckets and blaming each other for the smoke, he slowly learned the one thing anger never wants anyone to remember. Anger is not a protector. It is not a teacher. It is not a guide. It is a mask over a lie. A costume over a child's fear. A loud distraction covering a quiet, buried belief that never deserved to live in the first place. And the moment that belief is questioned, the bucket is just a bucket. The gasoline is just air. And the fire was never as real as the mind that finally decided to turn and look.